I'm Melinda Schwakhofer, and I'm here to tell you about my quilt Breathe. In 2020, I received a commission from Arts Council England, via Significant Seams, to make a piece of artwork reflecting my response to the pandemic. During this period, I was deeply impacted by the murder of George Floyd in May 2020. For me, the eruption of the Black Lives Matter movement and the toppling of statues around the world stood out as a moment of unalloyed, deeply emotional expression at a time when we were all under an enforced style of solitary living, a time that limited our ability to share emotions with fellow human beings. Centuries of rage poured forth in the protests. At the time that I heard of the killing, I was devastated. I read the papers all that weekend and looked at the photos that were coming out from it all. I was grief-stricken and infuriated that this was happening yet again, and I could understand the protests. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. The Watts riots in 1965, the Rodney King beating in 1992 and the subsequent riots. The act was caught on video, but a verdict exonerated white police officers. I remember the police killing of Eric Garner in 2014. He also pleaded with his killers, "I can't breathe," a plea which became a rallying cry for the Black Lives Matter protest movement. These and other events were part of the fabric of my life there. And so I could easily understand why people were toppling statues of slavers and colonialists. I wanted to make a quilt that talked about the root of the problem, which I feel is the unacknowledged and unrepentant history of slavery in the United States and the link to police brutality. I started at the bottom of the quilt with an image of the Brooks slave ship, a famous image that was first used by anti-slavery campaigners from Plymouth, England in the late 18th century. I also used this image to make the plinth and to form the central figure that's standing on it. The image is also used in this border surrounding the inner part of the quilt. All of the fabric was digitally designed and printed, and I screen printed the words "I can't breathe" in the background here. Also at the bottom of the quilt, I used posters with human beings for sale. They were called Negroes or slaves. They were cargo. They weren't even considered as human beings. The next set of posters I found were for runaway slaves. These were created by owners of slaves who had run away, putting posters up and offering reward money to get them back. These people are now seen as property, and when they were named in some of these posters, the names were the names that they had been given by plantation owners. These were not their own names. They did not have their own agency as slaves whose very names had been taken from them, along with all their other rights as human beings. In the quilt, I also show and talk about runaway slave patrols and plantation police, whose badges are shown here. In many cases, these are the forerunners and gave rise to many police departments in the United States. So police brutality is not a new or modern problem. For some police departments, it is in their DNA as organizations. In the 1960s, with the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X spoke very eloquently about police brutality. Here I have a protester from the 60s and a more contemporary woman, both protesting against police brutality, decades apart. And at the top of the quilt, where the figure's head is, I've incorporated photographs from the protests that were happening in Minneapolis in May 2020. I found this image of the man so powerful because it's during COVID and he's pulled his mask down around his neck and he's ready to let his rage out. He's letting his fury out against this happening. On the four corners of the quilt are figures which echo each other. At the bottom are a woman and a man from an anti-slavery poster, saying, "Am I not a woman and a sister? And am I not a man and a brother?" These are people wanting to assert their humanity. At the top, I've got a white police officer and Colin Kaepernick taking a knee against racism. In a lot of my work, I include a haiku because I feel that poetry can help sum up a lot of things that pictures find hard to capture or communicate. The haiku that I wrote for this quilt is, "Smoldering embers, centuries-old rage, ignite into flame. We breathe." On the back of the quilt are the words, "Remember the unnamed." This is to remember the millions who died in the Atlantic crossing and in slavery. It is flanked by two periwinkles, which were the most common wildflower to be brought to the grave sites of enslaved Americans. These flowers have led researchers to find many unmarked burial grounds. They are a symbol of the endurance of enslaved Americans and their legacy. The cenotaph in the center of the quilt holds the hashtag Say Their Names. It's from a website that highlights the names of Black Americans who were killed by police or civilians. The names on the quilt are from recent times through October 3, 2020, when I finished making the quilt. Here you can see George Floyd's name and that there are many who followed his death. In this quilt, I make a direct link between the racism of the present-day United States and the widespread refusal to acknowledge that slavery is at its heart. The same blindness afflicts many Americans when it comes to acknowledging that the American dream is founded on two evils: the slavery of Africans and the genocide of Native Americans, a genocide that is part of my heritage as an enrolled member of the Muskogee Creek Nation. The toppling of statues, notably the toppling of the Colston statue in Bristol, struck me as particularly powerful. It was not merely the tumbling of stone or metal. It was the overturning of centuries in which the beneficiaries of the slave trade were literally put on a pedestal while their victims were ignored. It is time to rebalance history, to seek truth, not lies. We all have a role to play in that rebalancing. As an artist, as a human being, this is part of my contribution. Thank you for listening to me talking about my quilt, and I hope someday that you'll get to see it in person.